The scorching sun beat down on Winifred Evans' raw, blistered hands as she drove the pickaxe into the unyielding earth once more, sending a jolt of pain up her arms. Sweat trickled down her temple, mixing with the dust that clung to her face. For 3 weeks, she had been digging, desperately searching for water on the barren plot of land she now called home, but the New Mexico Territory's soil seemed determined to keep its secrets. It was the summer of 1878 in Los Lunas, New Mexico Territory, and Winifred Winnie, to the few who knew her, had arrived with nothing but determination and the deed to a homestead left by her late father. The promise of a new beginning had quickly soured under the relentless desert sun. "Worthless," she muttered, kicking at the dry dirt. Her father's letter had promised fertile land with an abundant water source. Instead, she'd found nothing but hard-scrabble earth that refused to yield even a drop of moisture. The nearest creek was a half-day's ride, meaning every drop she used had to be hauled back in barrels that depleted far too quickly. Winnie drove the pickaxe into the ground again, her 22-year-old body protesting the abuse. She'd been a schoolteacher back in Pennsylvania, her hands more accustomed to chalk and books than calluses and blisters. But after her father's death and her dismissal from the school due to budget constraints, she'd had little choice but to claim his homestead or starve. "Just need water," she gasped, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. The 6-foot hole she'd managed to dig over the past weeks showed no signs of dampness. Her supplies were running dangerously low, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. The sound of hoofbeats cut through her thoughts. Winnie scrambled out of the hole, heart hammering in her chest. Visitors were rare and not always welcome in these parts. Squinting against the sun, she could make out a lone rider approaching from the south, his silhouette wavering in the heat. She reached for her father's old Colt revolver, keeping it hidden in the folds of her dirt-stained skirt. 3 months in New Mexico had taught her caution. The rider slowed as he approached. He sat tall in the saddle, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His horse, a magnificent Palomino, looked better cared for than most people in these parts. "Afternoon, madam," he called out, keeping a respectful distance. "Quinn Armstrong's the name. Couldn't help but notice you're trying to dig a well." Winnie stood straighter, chin lifted despite her exhaustion. "And what business is that of yours, Mr. Armstrong?" He dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of the turquoise the local Pueblo tribes traded. A leather vest hung open over his cotton shirt, and a Colt peacemaker rested on his hip, worn but well-maintained. "No offense intended," he said, removing his hat. "It's just that you're digging in the wrong spot. Water table's too deep here. You'll dig clear to China before you hit moisture." "Is that so?" Winnie bristled, tightening her grip on the hidden revolver. "And I suppose you know where I should be digging." Quinn Armstrong's lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "As a matter of fact, I do. Been working as a dowser up and down the Rio Grande for 5 years now. Before that, I was with the cavalry. Got a knack for finding water where others can't." "A dowser?" Winnie couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "You mean you wave a stick around and claim it tells you where water is?" "Something like that." He didn't seem offended, though I prefer to call it a divining rod. "And it works, whether you believe in it or not." Winnie studied him. There was something in his steady gaze that didn't match the usual drifters and opportunists who occasionally passed through. Still, she'd learned to be wary. "What's your price, Mr. Armstrong?" "I should tell you right away that I have precious little to spare." "No charge for looking," he said, reaching for something tied to his saddle. He produced a Y-shaped branch, stripped of its bark and polished smooth by handling. "If I find water, we can discuss terms." "If I don't, you've lost nothing but a few minutes of your time." When he hesitated, pride warring with desperation. The truth was, she was running out of options. Her water barrel was down to the dregs, and the nearest town was a day's ride away. "Very well," she finally said. "But I'll be watching you closely, Mr. Armstrong. Wouldn't expect anything less, Miss Evans." "Winifred Evans," Quinn nodded, replacing his hat. "Well, Miss Evans, let's see if we can find you some water." He walked the property slowly, holding the forked branch in front of him with an intensity that seemed almost comical to Winnie. Yet there was a methodical nature to his movements that kept her from dismissing him entirely. For nearly an hour, he traversed her land, occasionally stopping to study the terrain or the sparse vegetation. Finally, he halted about 50 yards from her cabin, near a small cluster of scrub brush. "Here," he said, planting his boot firmly on the spot. "The water's deep, but it's strong." Good vein running from the mountains, Winnie approached cautiously. "How can you be certain?" Instead of answering, he handed her the divining rod. "Hold this, palms up, grip loose." Skeptical but curious, Winnie took the Y-shaped branch. It felt warm and smooth in her blistered hands. "Now walk slowly toward where I'm standing," he instructed. Feeling foolish, Winnie did as he asked. At first, nothing happened. Then, as she approached the spot where he stood, the branch began to tremble in her hands. Before she could tighten her grip, it twisted downward with such force that it nearly wrenched from her grasp. "What in heaven's name?" she gasped, dropping the branch as if it had burned her. Quinn's eyes crinkled at the corners. "That's your water, Miss Evans, about 30 feet down, I'd reckon." "This is some kind of trick," she said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. "No trick. Just nature speaking to those willing to listen." He bent to retrieve the divining rod. "Water's the lifeblood out here. Without it, nothing survives, not crops, not cattle, not people." Winnie looked at the unremarkable patch of ground, then back at her failed attempt 6 feet deep and nowhere near completion. "Even if you're right, Mr. Armstrong, I can't dig 30 feet on my own." Quinn surveyed her homestead, the small cabin she'd repaired, the pitiful attempt at a garden, the meager corral where her old mare stood listlessly in the heat. "No," he agreed after a moment. "You can't." Something in his tone made Winnie's spine stiffen. "I'm not looking for charity, Mr. Armstrong. Good, because I'm not offering any." He adjusted his hat against the sun. "I'm offering a business proposition. I help you dig your well, and in exchange, you provide room and board until the job's done. Plus, I get water rights when I'm passing through these parts." Winnie hesitated. Having a stranger, a man, staying on her property went against everything she'd been taught about propriety, but dying of thirst wasn't particularly proper either. How long would it take, with 2 of us working? 2 weeks, maybe 3, depending on what we hit. Rock can slow things down considerably. 3 weeks. She could endure almost anything for 3 weeks if it meant having water of her own. "One condition," she said firmly. "You sleep in the barn, not the house." A flash of amusement crossed his face. "I've slept in worse places, Miss Evans. And I'll need references. How do I know you're who you say you are?" "Fair enough. Josiah Miller at the general store in Los Lunas knows me, so does Sheriff Holt. You can ask around about Quinn Armstrong next time you're in town." He paused. "Though I suspect your water situation might not allow for that kind of delay." He was right, and they both knew it. Winnie squared her shoulders. "You can start tomorrow at first light." "I expect a full day's work for your board." "Yes, madam." He touched the brim of his hat. "I'll ride out to my camp and fetch my gear, be back by sundown if that suits." Winnie nodded stiffly, watching as he mounted his palomino with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. "One more thing, Miss Evans," he called as he turned his horse. "Might want to start preparing for success. Once we hit water, you'll need a proper well structure." With that, he rode off, leaving Winnie standing beside the spot he'd marked, the divining rod still lying where she'd dropped it. After a moment's hesitation, she picked it up, running her fingers along its smooth surface. "Nonsense," she murmured to herself, yet she found herself walking back and forth across the spot, waiting for the mysterious pull that had so startled her. Nothing happened. Sighing, she headed back to her cabin, the divining rod still in hand. Whether Quinn Armstrong was a charlatan or not, he was right about one thing: she couldn't dig a proper well alone. And if there was even a chance he could find water, it was worth the risk of allowing him to stay. The sun was beginning to set when Quinn returned, his packhorse laden with tools and supplies. Winnie watched from the porch as he efficiently unloaded everything into the small barn, sorting his gear with the precision of a man accustomed to living on the move. She'd spent the afternoon preparing a simple meal: beans, cornbread, and the last of her salt pork. It wasn't much, but hospitality demanded she feed a hired hand properly, even one as unconventional as a water dowser. "Supper's ready when you are, Mr. Armstrong," she called when he emerged from the barn. He looked surprised but nodded. "Thank you, Miss Evans. I'll just wash up first if that's all right." Winnie watched as he used the small amount of water she'd set aside in a basin, scrubbing his hands and face with a thoroughness that spoke of military training. His movements were economical, wasting nothing, not water, not motion, not time. At the table, they ate in awkward silence until Winnie finally spoke. "You mentioned you were with the cavalry. Which regiment?" "Sixth Cavalry, served under Major General Crook during the Apache campaigns." His voice was neutral, giving away nothing. That must have been difficult. Quinn looked up from his plate, studying her for a moment. "War always is, Miss Evans. Please call me Winnie. If we're to work together for weeks, Miss Evans will become tiresome." "Winnie, then," he nodded. "And I'm Quinn to most folks. What brought you from the cavalry to water dowsing?" She asked, genuinely curious. It seemed an unusual career change. Quinn's face closed slightly. "Found I had more interest in helping things grow than in destroying them." He took a bite of cornbread. "This is good, thank you." Recognizing the deflection, Winnie changed the subject. "Have you lived in the territory long?" "About 5 years now. Traveled all over Arizona, Colorado, Texas, but I keep coming back to the Rio Grande Valley. Something about it suits me." "The heat and dust suit you." Winnie couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. That earned her a small smile. "The openness, the way you can see for miles, the sky that goes on forever, back east everything feels." He searched for the word. "Confined," Winnie understood that more than she cared to admit. Her life in Pennsylvania had been respectable but constrained by expectations, by tradition, by the narrow futures permitted to a woman alone. "What brought you out here, if you don't mind my asking?" Quinn inquired, pushing his empty plate aside. "My father," Winnie replied, rising to clear the dishes. "He came west years ago after my mother died, wrote to me about the homestead he'd claimed, how it would be my inheritance someday." She stared out the small window at the darkening landscape. He made it sound like paradise. "And instead you found this," Quinn observed quietly. "Yes," Winnie said, turning back to him. "Instead I found this." Their eyes met across the small room, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared disappointment, or of the stubborn hope that kept people pushing westward despite everything. "We'll start at first light," Quinn said, breaking the moment. "The digging will be hard, but if there's water there, we'll find it." "If," Winnie repeated. Quinn rose from the table. "When," he corrected gently. "Sleep well, Winnie Evans. Tomorrow we begin bringing your inheritance back to life." True to his word, Quinn was already preparing the digging site when Winnie emerged from her cabin at dawn. He'd marked out a circle approximately 6 feet in diameter and was laying out tools with methodical precision. "Good morning," Winnie called, carrying a pot of coffee and 2 tin cups. Quinn looked up, tipping his hat. "Morning, thought I'd get an early start while it's still cool." Winnie handed him a cup, noticing the calluses on his hands as their fingers brushed. These were working hands, not unlike her father's had been. The comparison brought an unexpected lump to her throat. "I made biscuits," she said to cover her momentary discomfort. "They're not much, but they'll keep you going till midday." "Appreciate that." Quinn took a long sip of coffee. "You ever dug a well before?" "No, but I've dug plenty of holes these past weeks." He nodded toward the abandoned pit she'd started. "That's good experience. This will be similar, just deeper and wider. We'll need to shore up the sides as we go to prevent collapse." For the next hour, Quinn explained the process, showing Winnie how they would work in shifts, one digging while the other hauled up buckets of earth. As the hole deepened, they would add a ladder and eventually construct a windlass system to make the work easier. By mid-morning, they had removed the topsoil and were beginning to hit harder ground. Quinn worked steadily, his movements efficient and practiced. When it was Winnie's turn to dig, he offered guidance without condescension, showing her how to conserve her strength and use leverage rather than brute force. The sun climbed higher, turning the work site into an oven. Sweat soaked through Winnie's cotton blouse and dust clung to her skin in gritty layers. By noon, they had dug nearly 4 feet down. "Time to rest," Quinn announced, helping Winnie climb out of the hole. "Heat like this can kill a person if they're not careful." They retreated to the shade of the cabin's porch, where Winnie had set out a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried apples. As they ate, Quinn studied the distant mountains, his expression thoughtful. "Your father," he said after a while. "What happened to him?" Winnie tensed slightly. Influenza, according to the letter I received. A neighbor found him and sent word to me. I'm sorry. I barely knew him, Winnie admitted. He left when I was 12 after mother died, sent money when he could, letters occasionally. He was always chasing the next opportunity. And you? I stayed with my aunt, finished school, became a teacher. Winnie shrugged. It was a good life, steady, until the school board decided they couldn't afford to keep me on. Quinn nodded, understanding. So you came to claim your inheritance. It was that or marry the widower who owned the dry goods store. He had 3 children and hands that wandered where they shouldn't. Winnie flushed slightly at her own candor. I chose the desert instead. Seems like a sensible choice, Quinn said, his voice carefully neutral. They fell silent, the weight of shared confidences settling between them. After a moment, Winnie spoke again. You never answered my question yesterday about how you went from cavalry to dowsing. Quinn set down his cup, his expression guarded. It's not a particularly pleasant story. Few stories from the frontier are. He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her worth as a confidant. I was with a scouting party near the Gila River. We were tracking a band of Apaches who'd reportedly raided a settlement. 3 days in, our water ran out. Maps showed a creek nearby, but it had dried up. Quinn's eyes grew distant. Men started to get desperate. Horses, too. By the 4th day, we were in serious trouble. That's when our guide, an old Mexican fellow, pulled out a forked stick. The other men laughed at him, but I watched. He found water 20 feet below a dry stream bed. And that's when you became interested in dowsing. Not exactly. Quinn's jaw tightened. That's when I realized how precious water is out here and how little most Easterners understand about finding it. The army wanted to pacify the land, but they didn't understand it, couldn't read it. So you left, after my enlistment ended. Spent time with that old Mexican, learned what he knew, studied with a Navajo water keeper too, found I had a knack for it. He looked up at her. People out here need water more than they need soldiers, Miss Evans. Winnie nodded slowly. I'm beginning to understand that. As the days passed, the well grew deeper. 6 feet became 10, then 15. The work was brutally hard, harder than anything Winnie had ever done. Each night she collapsed into exhausted sleep, only to rise at dawn and begin again. But something else was growing alongside the well. Conversations over meals became longer, more personal. Quinn told stories of the places he'd seen, the people he'd met in his travels. Winnie shared memories of her students, of the books she loved, of the dreams that had sustained her through difficult times. 2 weeks into the digging, they hit a layer of rock that slowed their progress to a crawl. Quinn fashioned a primitive drill, and they took turns hammering it into the unyielding stone, progress measured in inches rather than feet. It's no use, Winnie said one evening, her hands raw despite the gloves Quinn had fashioned for her from soft leather. We'll never break through. Quinn looked up from the tool he was sharpening. We will, it's just a matter of persistence. And if there's no water below, if your divining was wrong, it wasn't wrong. His certainty was unwavering. I can feel it, Winnie, the water's there. She wanted to believe him. More than that, she had begun to need to believe him not just for the water, but for what it represented. Hope, possibility, a future on this land that had once seemed so barren. The next morning, they resumed their attack on the stone layer. Hour after hour, they chipped away, the sound of metal on rock echoing across the empty landscape. By mid-afternoon, Winnie's arms felt like lead, and sweat stung her eyes despite the bandana tied around her forehead. Let me take a turn, Quinn said, reaching for the drill. I can manage, Winnie insisted, though her hands were shaking with fatigue. I know you can, but you don't have to do everything alone. His voice was gentle. That's why I'm here. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, that his presence had become about more than just the well. Winnie relinquished the drill, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Thank you, she said softly. Quinn nodded, lowering himself into the hole they'd carved from the earth. For the next hour, Winnie watched as he attacked the stone with methodical determination, each strike precise and powerful. His shirt clung to his back, revealing muscles honed by years of physical labor. Suddenly, Quinn paused mid-swing. Wait, he called up to her. I think. He struck again, and there was a different sound, a crack followed by a hollow echo. Winnie, we're through, heart racing. Winnie leaned over the edge of the well, through the rock. Yes. Quinn's face was alight with triumph. And there's something else. The stones damp, we're close to water, very close. Excitement surged through Winnie's exhausted body. How close? A few more feet, maybe less. We need to widen this opening. He began chipping at the edges of the breakthrough, enlarging the hole. Hand me the pry bar. Winnie passed down the tool, watching as Quinn worked with renewed energy. For an hour, he labored, breaking away chunks of stone to create an opening large enough to continue digging. When he finally climbed out, his clothes were soaked with sweat and his hands were bleeding despite his gloves. Tomorrow, he said, his eyes shining, we'll hit water, I promise you that. That night, Winnie found sleep elusive despite her exhaustion. She kept thinking of Quinn's certainty, his unwavering faith in the presence of water beneath their feet. And beyond that, she thought of the man himself, his quiet strength, his respectful manner, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. It was foolish, she knew. Quinn Armstrong was a drifter, a man who followed water veins across the desert. He wouldn't stay, couldn't stay. Yet something in her responded to him in ways she hadn't anticipated when she'd grudgingly agreed to his help 3 weeks ago. Morning came with a sense of anticipation that eclipsed her fatigue. Together they returned to the well, descending the ladder they'd constructed as the shaft deepened. Quinn went first, inspecting the previous day's breakthrough. The stone's definitely wet, he called up. And there's a hollow sound below. I think we're just above an underground stream or pool. Winnie joined him at the bottom of the shaft, the space tight with both of them there. What do we do now? Dig carefully. We don't want to punch through too suddenly and risk flooding the shaft. Quinn selected a smaller shovel. Watch for any change in the soil. They worked in tandem, Quinn loosening the earth and Winnie scooping it into buckets that they hauled up with their pulley system. The soil grew increasingly damp, sticking to their tools and boots. It's close, Quinn murmured, almost reverently. Very close. Winnie could feel it too, a heaviness in the air, a change in the smell of the earth. Something primordial stirred in her, an ancient recognition of water's presence. Quinn paused, setting his shovel aside. Let me try something. He knelt, pressing his ear to the ground. After a moment, he looked up at Winnie, his eyes wide. I can hear it. The water's flowing below us. Heart pounding, Winnie knelt beside him, placing her ear where his had been. At first, she heard nothing. Then faintly, a soft, gurgling sound reached her, the unmistakable sound of moving water. Oh my God, she whispered, sitting back on her heels. It's really there. Quinn nodded, his face solemn. Your father wasn't wrong, Winnie. This land has what you need. It was just waiting for someone to find it. Tears pricked at Winnie's eyes, surprising her. She blinked them back, not wanting Quinn to see her emotional response. But when she looked up, his expression told her he understood exactly what this moment meant. Let's bring it home, he said softly. With renewed purpose, they continued digging, the soil growing muddier with each shovelful. Then, as Quinn drove his shovel into the earth once more, water began seeping up around the blade. Winnie, he said, his voice hushed. It's here. He withdrew the shovel, and water bubbled up through the opening, filling the small depression they'd created. It was clear and cold, catching the sunlight that filtered down the shaft. Without thinking, Winnie reached out, letting the water run over her fingers. It's beautiful, she breathed. Quinn dipped his bandana in the pool and wrung it out over Winnie's dusty face. The cold droplets felt like a benediction against her skin. First water from your well, he said. Should be yours. Winnie laughed, the sound echoing up the shaft. In a sudden impulse, she scooped up a handful of the muddy water and splashed it at Quinn, catching him off guard. Hey, he protested, but he was laughing too, his face streaked with mud and sweat and joy. For a moment, they were simply two people celebrating a hard-won victory, the weeks of back-breaking labor culminating in this small miracle bubbling from the earth. Then, as their laughter subsided, Winnie became acutely aware of their proximity in the narrow shaft, of Quinn's gaze on her face, of the way time seemed to slow around them. We should, she began, but the words died as Quinn reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle despite his calloused fingers. Winnie, he said, her name almost a question. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Then from above came the sound of an approaching horse. Reality crashed back. Quinn pulled away, his expression shuddering. Someone's coming, he said, all business now. Stay here, I'll check who it is. He climbed the ladder with practiced ease, leaving Winnie alone with the burbling water and her racing heart. She pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks, shocked at her own response to him. What had she been thinking? What had almost happened? Pushing the thoughts aside, she followed Quinn up the ladder, emerging into the harsh sunlight just as a rider approached the homestead. It was Josiah Miller from the general store in Los Lunas, his wagon loaded with supplies. "Miss Evans," he called, lifting his hat. "Thought I'd check on you since you haven't been to town in weeks. Brought some basics, figured you might be running low." "Mr. Miller," Winnie acknowledged, suddenly conscious of her filthy clothes and disheveled appearance. "That's very kind of you." Miller's eyes shifted to Quinn, recognition dawning. "Armstrong, didn't know you were working out this way." "Miller," Quinn nodded. "Miss Evans hired me to find water." "And did you?" The storekeeper looked skeptical. Quinn's expression remained neutral. "Just hit it. Good strong vein, too." Miller raised his eyebrows. "Well, I'll be, your reputation's well earned, it seems." He turned to Winnie. "You're fortunate, Miss Evans. Water changes everything out here." "I'm beginning to understand that," Winnie replied, feeling a surge of pride in what they'd accomplished. As Miller unloaded the supplies he'd brought, flour, coffee, salt, and other necessities, Winnie found herself watching Quinn. He helped efficiently, his manner cordial but distant, so different from the man who had laughed with her moments before in the well. Later, after Miller had departed with promises to spread the news of their successful well, Winnie found Quinn by the windlass, making adjustments to the rope system. "We'll need to line the shaft with stone or wood to prevent collapse," he said without looking up. "And construct a proper cover for the top." "Yes, of course," Winnie replied, unsettled by his businesslike tone. "Quinn, about earlier, we still have work to do," he interrupted. "Now that we've hit water, we need to ensure the well is stable and usable." Winnie stepped back, stung by his abruptness. "Of course," she repeated, more formally this time. "I'll prepare supper while you continue here." For the next few days, they worked side by side, widening the bottom of the well to create a reservoir and lining the shaft with stones to prevent cave-ins. But something had changed between them. The easy camaraderie of the previous weeks had been replaced by a careful politeness that felt more isolating than their initial wariness. Quinn spoke only of the work, offering instruction and assistance, but volunteering nothing personal. When their hands accidentally touched, he withdrew as if burned. At meals, he ate quickly and excused himself to continue working or to turn in early, when he told herself it was for the best. Quinn Armstrong was a drifter, a man without roots. She was trying to build something lasting here. What future could there possibly be in the momentary connection they'd shared? Yet each night, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to the distant sounds of Quinn moving about in the barn, she found herself wondering what might have happened if Miller hadn't arrived when he did. Would Quinn have kissed her? Would she have let him? And why did the thought both terrify and exhilarate her? A week after discovering water, the well was nearly complete. Quinn had constructed a sturdy windlass with a crank handle and bucket, making it easy to draw water from the depth. The water itself had cleared, running cold and sweet, the best Winnie had ever tasted. The evening meal was quieter than usual. Tomorrow, Quinn would finish the well cover and their agreement would be concluded. Neither mentioned his impending departure, though it hung between them like a shadow. "I've been thinking," Winnie said as she cleared the dishes, "about what to plant now that I have water. Perhaps a vegetable garden to start, then maybe fruit trees eventually." Quinn nodded, staring into his coffee. "Beans do well in this soil, squash too. Come spring, you might try corn." "I'll need to fence the garden to keep animals out." "That's wise." He looked up then, his eyes meeting hers briefly before sliding away. "You'll manage well enough, I think. You're stronger than you look, Winifred Evans." Something in his tone made her heart twist. "Thanks to your help," she said softly. Quinn stood abruptly. "I should check on my horse. Thank you for supper." He was gone before she could respond, the door closing quietly behind him. Winnie stood in the middle of her small cabin, a dish towel clutched in her hands, fighting an inexplicable urge to cry. Outside, the desert night had fallen, stars pricking the vast darkness above. Winnie stepped onto her porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cooling air. In the distance, she could see Quinn's silhouette as he moved around the corral, checking his palomino. 3 weeks ago, he had been a stranger, a man she'd viewed with suspicion and reluctance. Now, the thought of him leaving left an emptiness she wasn't prepared for. Making a sudden decision, Winnie set down the dish towel and walked toward the corral. Quinn looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes," Winnie said, summoning her courage. "I think there is." Quinn waited, his stance wary. "You've been avoiding me," she continued, "ever since we found water, since that moment when," she faltered, uncertain how to name what had passed between them. "I've been focused on completing the work," Quinn replied stiffly. "That's what you hired me for." "Is that all it was to you? A job?" His silence was answer enough. Winnie felt heat rising to her cheeks, embarrassment and hurt mingling uncomfortably. She had misread everything, projected her own foolish feelings onto a man who saw her as nothing more than an employer. "I see," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Well, I apologize for the misunderstanding. You've fulfilled your obligations admirably, Mr. Armstrong. I'll have your payment ready in the morning." She turned to leave, dignity wrapped around her like armor, when Quinn's voice stopped her. "Winnie, wait." There was an edge of desperation in his tone that she'd never heard before. "It's not what you think." She turned back slowly. "Then what is it?" Quinn ran a hand through his hair, his composure cracking. "You have a chance here, a real chance to build something. This land, with water, it can give you the life you came west for." "I don't understand what that has to do with." "I'm a drifter, Winnie. A man who follows water from place to place, who doesn't stay anywhere long enough to see crops grow or buildings rise." His voice roughened. "That's who I am. That's all I can be." Understanding dawned slowly. "You're protecting me," she said. "From you." Quinn looked away. "I'm being realistic. You deserve more than a man who can't put down roots." "Shouldn't that be my decision?" Winnie stepped closer, emboldened by the vulnerability she'd glimpsed. "You found water where I saw only dust. You brought life back to this land when I was ready to give up. Do you think I'm too blind to see the worth in that, in you?" "Winnie." Her name was a plea on his lips. "Tell me you felt nothing," she challenged. "Tell me I imagined everything these past weeks." In the moonlight, she saw his expression shift, the careful mask slipping to reveal the conflict beneath. "You didn't imagine it," he admitted roughly, "but feelings don't change facts. I don't belong here." "Where do you belong, then?" Winnie asked softly. "Where is home for Quinn Armstrong?" The question seemed to strike him like a physical blow. For a long moment he was silent, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I don't know. I've been searching for it since I left the army, thought maybe I'd recognize it when I found it." His eyes returned to her face. "These weeks here, they've been the closest I've come in a long time," Winnie's heart stuttered. "Then why are you so determined to leave?" "Because staying would mean changing everything I am, everything I've been for years." Quinn's hands clenched at his sides. "And I'm not sure I know how to do that anymore." The admission cost him visibly, pride warring with a longing so profound it resonated in Winnie's own chest. She understood then that Quinn Armstrong was as lost as she had been when she first arrived in this harsh land, a soul adrift, searching for solid ground. "Maybe," she said carefully, "we could figure it out together, not everything at once, just one day at a time." Quinn looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You don't know what you're asking, Winnie." "I'm asking for a chance, the same chance you gave this land when you believed there was water beneath the dust." The silence stretched between them, filled with the night sounds of the desert, the distant yip of coyotes, the rustle of wind through scrub brush, the soft nickering of horses in the corral. Finally, Quinn moved, closing the distance between them with 2 steps. His hand, calloused and warm, cupped her cheek with infinite gentleness. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met, Winifred Evans," he murmured, his eyes never leaving hers. "Is that a compliment, Mr. Armstrong?" "It's a fact." A smile touched his lips, transforming his face. "One I've come to admire greatly." Then he was kissing her, and the world narrowed to the point where they connected, his lips on hers, his hand at her waist, the solid warmth of him against the desert night. It was a gentle kiss, questioning rather than demanding, offering rather than taking. When they broke apart, Winnie kept her eyes closed for a moment, savoring the sensation. "Does this mean you'll stay?" she whispered. "For a while," Quinn answered honestly. "Long enough to see if what's growing between us is as real as the water beneath your feet. Beyond that, I can't promise." It wasn't everything, but it was enough, a beginning, a seed planted in soil that finally held the promise of life. "I'll take those terms, Mr. Armstrong," Winnie said, unable to keep the smile from her voice. He laughed softly, drawing her closer. I think we're well past Mr. Armstrong, don't you? Quinn, then, she amended, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to two souls finding an unexpected oasis in each other's presence. Whatever tomorrow might bring, tonight they had found water in the desert, in the earth, and in themselves. Fall painted the Las Lunas landscape, in subtle shifts of color, the cottonwoods along the distant Rio Grande turning golden, the mountains taking on a deeper blue in the crystalline autumn air. 3 months had passed since Quinn Armstrong had decided to stay for a while, and much had changed on Winnie's homestead. The well had transformed everything. With steady water, Winnie had established a thriving vegetable garden that produced enough to eat and to preserve for winter. Quinn had helped her fence the garden, build a proper chicken coop, and repair the sagging roof of her cabin before the rainy season. More than that, he had stayed. Not continuously twice, he had ridden out on dowsing jobs in nearby settlements, responding to requests from ranchers and homesteaders who had heard of his success at the Evans place. But each time, he had returned, bringing supplies and stories and a quiet joy that Winnie had come to depend on. They were careful with each other, these two people accustomed to self-reliance. Their relationship grew in measured steps, shared meals becoming shared confidences, becoming shared touches. Quinn now slept in a small room Winnie had helped him add to the cabin, a compromise between propriety and the deepening bond between them. The morning was cool as Winnie drew water from the well, the bucket rising smoothly on the windlass Quinn had crafted. The sight of clear water still brought a sense of wonder, even after months of dependability. Need a hand with that? Quinn's voice came from behind her as he approached from the barn where he'd been tending to the horses. I can manage, Winnie replied with a smile, but I won't turn down help. Together, they carried the heavy bucket to the cabin. Inside, the space had been transformed by small comforts curtains Winnie had sewn from fabric purchased in town, a bookshelf Quinn had built to hold her small collection of treasured volumes, a rag rug that brightened the plank floor. Josiah Miller mentioned that Caleb Porter's wife is sick again, Winnie said as she stoked the stove. Thought I might ride over this afternoon to see if they need anything. Quinn nodded, pouring coffee for them both. The Porter place is a good 6 miles, want company on the ride. I would, but don't you need to finish that irrigation channel for the south field? It can wait a day. Quinn handed her a steaming cup. Besides, Porter mentioned needing help with a well when I saw him in town last week. Might be worth looking at his situation while we're there. Winnie studied him over the rim of her cup. There was something in his tone that caught her attention, a careful neutrality that she had learned to recognize when something was on his mind. Another dowsing job? She asked, keeping her voice light despite the sudden tightness in her chest. Quinn met her gaze steadily. Possibly. His land's good, but the creek he relies on runs low in summer. A well would make all the difference for his cattle. Winnie nodded, trying to ignore the familiar dread that arose whenever Quinn spoke of work elsewhere. Each job carried the unspoken possibility that this time he might not return. We should leave soon then, she said, turning to gather the supplies she'd prepared for Mrs. Porter, herbs for fever, broth, fresh bread still warm from the oven. Quinn caught her hand as she moved past him, his touch gentle but insistent. Winnie, look at me. She did, reluctantly, meeting eyes that had become as familiar to her as her own reflection. I'm coming back, he said simply. Always. The words hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't fully said to each other in the months they'd been building this precarious life together. You can't promise that, Winnie replied softly. It's not in your nature to stay in one place. Quinn's expression grew serious. My nature's changing, Winnie Evans. Hasn't you noticed? She had noticed. The restlessness that had radiated from him when they first met had gradually calmed, like a river finding its proper channel. He still rode out occasionally, still followed the call of water beneath the earth, but there was a new rhythm to his movements, always circling back, always returning to her. I've noticed, she admitted, but I'm afraid to count on it. Quinn released her hand, stepping back slightly. Fair enough, I haven't given you much reason to. The hurt in his voice made Winnie regret her honesty. Quinn, I didn't mean no, you're right, he interrupted. Words are easy, it's the staying that's hard. He picked up his hat from the table. We should head to the Porters if we want to make it there and back before dark. The ride to the Porter homestead was largely silent, each of them wrapped in private thoughts. The land rolled gently around them, the autumn sunshine warming the day as they traveled. Occasionally, Quinn would point out signs of water beneath the surface, certain plants that only grew where moisture was near, subtle changes in the terrain that spoke to underground streams. Caleb Porter's place was larger than Winnie's homestead, with a substantial herd of cattle and several outbuildings surrounding the main house. As they approached, Porter himself came out to greet them, his weathered face creasing in a smile beneath his gray-streaked beard. "Miss Evans, Armstrong." "Good to see you both," he called, taking the reins of their horses as they dismounted. "Mr. Porter," Winnie acknowledged. "I heard Mrs. Porter was unwell again." Porter's expression sobered. "Lung fever, the doctor says. She's some better today, though. She'll be glad of the company." While Winnie went inside to visit with Martha Porter, Quinn walked the property with Caleb, discussing the challenges of watering livestock through the dry months and examining possible well sites. By the time Winnie emerged from the house 2 hours later, the men had marked several promising locations. "Your husband's got a gift, Miss Evans," Porter said as they prepared to leave. "Never seen anyone read the land quite like him." Winnie felt her cheeks warm at the mistake. "Mr. Armstrong isn't my husband," she corrected gently. Porter looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "My apologies, I just assumed given." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "No apology needed," Quinn said smoothly. "Thank you for the coffee, Porter. I'll be back next week to start testing those sites we marked." The ride home began in awkward silence, the weight of Porter's assumption hanging between them. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the trail. "He's not the first to make that mistake," Quinn finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "Miller does it too," Winnie kept her eyes on the path ahead. "It's a small community, people talk." "Does it bother you, what they might be saying?" She considered the question honestly. "Not as much as it should, perhaps. My reputation was hardly spotless the moment I decided to live alone on a homestead. And now you're not alone, but living with a man who's not your husband." Quinn's tone was matter-of-fact without judgment. "Yes," Winnie glanced at him. "Does it bother you?" "What others think? No." He paused, adjusting his hat against the lowering sun. "But I don't like putting you in a compromising position." They rode in silence for another mile, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a hawk overhead. Winnie found herself thinking of the life she'd built since coming west, not the one she'd imagined, certainly, but one that had begun to feel genuinely hers. At the center of that life, increasingly, was the man riding beside her. "Quinn," she said suddenly, drawing her horse to a halt. "Where do you see yourself a year from now?" He stopped beside her, turning in the saddle to face her fully. The setting sun caught in his eyes, turning them the color of amber. "That depends," he said carefully. "On what?" "On whether I have a reason to put down those roots we talked about." His gaze was steady, searching her face. "On whether there's someone who wants me to stay, not just for a while, but for good." Winnie's heart thundered in her chest. "And if there is..." Quinn dismounted in one fluid movement, then reached up to help her down from her horse. When her feet touched the ground, he didn't step back, instead keeping his hands at her waist, his face close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. "Then I'd say I've spent enough time wandering," he said softly. "That maybe I've found the place I've been looking for all along." "Quinn," Winnie began, but he placed a finger gently against her lips. "Let me finish. I've been thinking about this for weeks." He took a deep breath. "When I came to your homestead, I saw a woman fighting against impossible odds, determined to make something from nothing. I admired your courage then. I love you for it now." The word hung in the air between them, simple and profound. "Love," Winnie repeated, the sound barely above a whisper. Quinn nodded, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "I know it's fast. I know we're still learning each other, but I'm certain of what I feel, Winnie, and I'm certain I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Tears pricked at Winnie's eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. "I never thought..." She began, then stopped, overcome. Concern flickered across Quinn's face. "I've upset you. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have..." "No," Winnie interrupted, finding her voice. "I'm not upset, She searched for the word. "I'm happy, terrified but happy." Relief softened his features. "Terrified. Loving someone means having something to lose." Winnie placed her hand against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I've lost so much already." "So have I," Quinn acknowledged, covering her hand with his own. "Maybe that's why this feels so important." "We know the cost of solitude, both of us." Winnie nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. They were two people who had carved out separate lives from difficult circumstances, who had learned to rely on themselves because others had proven unreliable. Trusting each other was an act of faith neither took lightly. "I love you too," she said finally, the words both frightening and freeing. "I think I have for longer than I've been willing to admit." Quinn's smile transformed his face, years falling away in an instant. He pulled her closer, one hand rising to cup her cheek. "Winifred Evans," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "will you marry me?" The question shouldn't have surprised her, given the direction of their conversation, but it did. Marriage meant permanence, commitment, a declaration before the community and God that they belonged to each other. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I will." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a hunger that matched her own. Winnie wound her arms around his neck, surrendering to the joy that coursed through her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. "We should get home," Quinn murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "Before it's fully dark." Home. The word resonated differently now, carrying the promise of a shared future rather than a solitary struggle. As they remounted and continued their journey, Winnie found herself stealing glances at Quinn, marveling at the turn her life had taken. 6 months ago, she had been a desperate woman digging in barren earth, searching for water that seemed an impossible dream. Now, she had not only found that water but also a love she had never expected. The stars were emerging as they reached the homestead, pinpricks of light in the vast desert sky. Quinn helped Winnie tend to the horses, their movements around each other easy and familiar after months of shared labor. Inside the cabin, Winnie lit the lantern, its warm glow banishing the darkness. Quinn built up the fire in the stove, the domestic routine comforting in its simplicity. "When?" he asked suddenly, turning to her. "The wedding, I mean," Winnie considered as she set water to boil for tea. "Before winter sets in, I think. Perhaps after Porter's well is completed," Quinn nodded. "That gives us about a month, enough time to make arrangements." He paused, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Unless you'd prefer to wait longer." "No," Winnie said firmly. "I've waited long enough for happiness. I don't intend to delay it further." The conviction in her voice brought a smile to Quinn's face. He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Then a month it is. We'll need to go into town, make it official, see about getting a preacher out here." "And I'll need a proper dress," Winnie added, her practical nature asserting itself even in this most romantic of moments. "I can't get married in this." She gestured to her work clothes, stained with the evidence of her daily labor. Quinn laughed, pulling her into his arms. "You could marry me in a flour sack and I wouldn't care," he said, "but I want you to have whatever will make the day perfect for you." Winnie rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "It's already perfect," she murmured. "More than I ever thought possible when I came here." Outside, the desert wind whispered across the land they were slowly transforming together. Inside, in the small cabin warmed by firelight and newfound certainty, two people who had been searching found home in each other's embrace. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a whirlwind of activity. Quinn completed the Porter well, finding a strong water source that would sustain the ranch through even the harshest summers. Winnie rode into Los Lunas to order fabric for a wedding dress, returning with blue cotton that reminded Quinn of the sky on a clear winter day. Word spread quickly through the scattered community. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance now made a point of riding by, offering congratulations and practical gifts, preserved fruits, hand-carved furniture, quilts that would warm the couple through the desert nights. Josiah Miller provided a large supply of goods on credit, waving away Winnie's concerns about payment. "Consider it a wedding present," he insisted. "Besides, with Armstrong settling down, my business will improve. No more riding miles to find water when we've got our own dowser right here in Los Lunas." Sheriff Holt offered to perform the ceremony himself, having been authorized by the territorial government to conduct marriages in areas where preachers were scarce. "Be honored to do it," he told them, his weathered face breaking into an uncharacteristic smile. About time Armstrong found something worth staying put for. As the wedding day approached, Quinn spent long hours working on a surprise for Winnie. Each day he would disappear for several hours, returning tired but satisfied, deflecting her curious questions with a secretive smile. "You'll see soon enough," was all he would say, his eyes crinkling with amusement at her frustration. The evening before their wedding, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Quinn finally took Winnie's hand. "I have something to show you," he said. "Your wedding gift. It's not quite finished, but—" "Now?" Winnie asked, surprised. "In the dark," Quinn smiled. "Trust me." He led her around the back of the cabin, where a narrow path wound through the brush toward a small rise. As they crested the hill, Winnie gasped. Below them, in a natural depression that had previously been nothing but scrub and stones, Quinn had created a garden. By diverting water from the well through carefully constructed channels, he had transformed the barren ground into fertile soil. Young fruit trees apple, pear, and cherry stood in neat rows, their slender trunks supported by stakes against the desert wind. In the center of the garden stood a stone bench, positioned to catch the morning sun. Beside it, a small spring bubbled up from the earth, forming a clear pool before continuing along the irrigation channel. "Quinn," Winnie breathed, her voice catching. "How did you— There was a natural spring here all along," he explained, his arm around her waist. "Just needed a little encouragement to reach the surface. The trees are from Miller's cousin who has an orchard near Albuquerque. It will take years before they bear fruit, but we have years," Winnie finished, leaning into him. "It's beautiful." "This will be your reading garden," Quinn said, leading her to the bench. "A place just for you, where you can find peace when the work is done." Tears welled in Winnie's eyes as she realized the depth of thought he had put into this gift. It wasn't merely a garden, but a recognition of who she was, the schoolteacher who still cherished quiet moments with her books, the woman who found beauty in growing things. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, overwhelmed. "Say you'll sit here sometimes and think of this moment," Quinn replied, his voice gentle. "Say you'll remember that I built this because I want to see you bloom here, just like these trees will." Winnie turned to face him, the moonlight silvering his features. "I have something for you too," she said, "though it can't compare to this." From her pocket, she withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. When Quinn unwrapped it, he found a pocket watch, its silver case engraved with his initials. "It was my father's," Winnie explained. "The only thing of value he left behind besides this land." She touched the watch gently. "I had Mr. Miller send it to Santa Fe to be engraved and repaired. It runs true now." Quinn stared at the watch, understanding the significance of the gift. "Winnie, I can't take your father's. You're not taking it," she interrupted. "I'm giving it to you, just as he gave me this land." She closed his fingers around the timepiece. "Time and earth, the foundations of a life together." Quinn's eyes met hers, emotion making his voice rough. "I'll treasure it always." They remained in the garden until the chill of the desert night drove them back to the cabin. Tomorrow they would speak their vows before their neighbors and begin their life as husband and wife. Tonight, in the quiet space between anticipation and fulfillment, they stood on the threshold of everything they had once believed impossible. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, the October sky an impossible blue above the mountains. Winnie dressed in the new blue cotton dress she had sewn, her hair arranged simply with wildflowers gathered from along the creek. Quinn wore his best shirt and a new vest, the silver watch nestled in the pocket against his heart. Neighbors arrived throughout the morning, bringing food and good wishes. Tables were set up outside the cabin, covered with cloths and laden with dishes that represented the best each family could offer Mrs. Porter's famous apple pie, sourdough bread from the Millers, roasted venison provided by Sheriff Holt himself. As midday approached, the guests gathered in a semicircle on the south side of the cabin, where the autumn sun provided warmth against the October breeze. Sheriff Holt stood waiting, his usual rugged appearance softened somewhat by a clean shirt and freshly trimmed beard. Quinn waited beside him, watching as Winnie emerged from the cabin. The sight of her in her blue dress, sunlight catching in her hair, made his breath catch. This woman, who had faced the hardships of the frontier with unwavering determination, who had built a life from nothing but grit and hope this extraordinary woman had chosen him. As Winnie walked toward him, Quinn realized with sudden clarity that all his wandering had been leading to this moment, this woman, this place. The water he had spent years finding for others had been a metaphor for his own search for belonging, for purpose, for home. Sheriff Holt cleared his throat, bringing Quinn back to the present as Winnie reached his side. The ceremony was simple and brief, frontier practicality prevailing over lengthy tradition. They exchanged vows in clear voices that carried across the gathered community, promising to honor and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When Holt pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed Winnie with a tenderness that belied the depth of his emotion. Around them, their neighbors cheered and applauded, genuine happiness for the dowser who had found his own source of life giving water in the schoolteacher from Pennsylvania. The celebration continued well into the afternoon, with music provided by Porter's son on fiddle and Miller's wife on accordion. There was dancing in the yard, stories shared around the tables, laughter that echoed off the distant hills. For a day, the isolation of frontier life was forgotten in the joy of community gathered for a common purpose. As the sun began to set, guests gradually departed, leaving behind well wishes and enough food to last the newlyweds for days. Quinn and Winnie stood on their porch, arms around each other, watching the last wagon disappear down the trail toward Las Lunas. "Mrs. Armstrong," Quinn said, testing the sound of her new name. "How does it feel?" Winnie smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the last golden light of day. "Like the beginning of everything." He led her inside to the cabin that was now truly their home. The single room had been transformed by their neighbor's generosity, a new quilt on the bed, curtains at the windows, a rocking chair by the stove where none had been before. "Look," Winnie said, pointing to the table where several packages remained unopened. "We still have gifts to unwrap." Together, they discovered treasures both practical and precious hand-dipped candles, a set of tin plates to replace Winnie's chipped ones, a leather-bound Bible with a space for recording family events. The last package, small and wrapped in brown paper, contained a hand-carved wooden sign. "The Armstrong Homestead," it read simply, the letters burned into the wood with careful precision. "From Caleb Porter," Quinn read from the accompanying note. "He says its red cedar will last a lifetime." "The Armstrong Homestead," Winnie repeated softly. "It has a fine sound to it." Quinn set the sign aside, taking both her hands in his. "It does," he agreed, "but not as fine as the sound of you calling my name each morning for the rest of our lives." He drew her to him then, all the love and promise of their future contained in the meeting of their lips, the entwining of their bodies, the joining of their souls. In the small cabin warmed by firelight and newfound certainty, two people who had been searching found completion in each other's embrace. Outside, the desert stars emerged one by one, bearing witness to the miracle of water in dry places, of love blooming against all odds in the harsh beauty of the western frontier. Spring came to the Armstrong homestead in a riot of unexpected color. The winter had been mild by New Mexico standards, allowing Quinn and Winnie to continue their improvements to the property even through the coldest months. Now, as March gave way to April, their efforts were rewarded with visible results. The fruit trees in Quinn's garden were budding, small explosions of pink and white against the dark branches. Winnie's vegetable plot was lined with neat rows of emerging seedlings: beans, squash, corn, and tomatoes that would provide food through summer and into fall. The chicken coop housed a dozen hens that produced more eggs than they could eat, providing a small income when Winnie took the surplus to Miller's store in Las Lunas. Most significantly, Quinn had used his knowledge of water to expand the irrigation system beyond their immediate needs. Small channels now carried water to previously barren areas of the homestead, transforming the landscape gradually but unmistakably from desert scrub to productive land. "I was thinking," Quinn said one evening as they sat in the garden he had created for Winnie, now blooming with wildflowers transplanted from along the creek, "about expanding the house come summer." Winnie looked up from the book she was reading, surprised. "Expanding? What did you have in mind?" "Another bedroom for starters." Quinn's eyes held a question as they met hers. Maybe a proper kitchen for you, a porch that wraps around to catch both morning and evening light. They had spoken of children, of course, in the abstract way of newlyweds still learning the rhythms of life together. But this was the first time Quinn had suggested concrete plans for a growing family. "You're thinking ahead," Winnie observed, setting her book aside. Quinn nodded, his expression earnest. "I am, is that all right?" Winnie's heart swelled with affection for this man who continued to surprise her with his thoughtfulness. "More than all right," she assured him, reaching for his hand, "though there might be a need for that extra bedroom sooner than you think." It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Quinn's eyes widened. "Winnie, are you saying?" She nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it when I was in town yesterday. Come fall, there will be 3 Armstrongs on this homestead." Quinn stared at her in stunned silence, then let out a whoop of joy that startled a nearby jackrabbit from its hiding place. In one fluid motion, he lifted Winnie from the bench and spun her around, his laughter echoing across the garden. "Careful," Winnie protested, though she was laughing too. "I'm in a delicate condition, remember?" Quinn set her down immediately, his hands gentle as they came to rest on her waist. "Are you all right?" "I didn't hurt you, did I?" "I'm fine," she assured him, touched by his concern. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Quinn." "I won't break." "Still," he said, his expression growing serious. "You'll need to rest more. Let me take on some of your chores, and we'll need to make sure you're eating properly." Winnie placed a finger against his lips, silencing his worried litany. "What I need," she said firmly, "is for my husband to kiss me and tell me he's happy about becoming a father." Quinn's face softened, love and wonder replacing concern. "I am so happy, Winnie," he whispered, drawing her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible." His kiss was tender, reverent almost, as if she had suddenly become something precious beyond measure. When they parted, Winnie saw tears glistening in his eyes, matching those that threatened her own composure. "I never thought I'd have this," Quinn admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "A home. A wife, a child on the way, after everything I've seen, everything I've done. I didn't think I deserved it." "Oh, Quinn," Winnie cradled his face in her hands, "you deserve every happiness. You've brought water to dry places, hope where there was none, including here." She took his hand, placing it over her heart. "You found the water in my soul when I was parched with loneliness." He kissed her again, pouring all his gratitude and love into the gesture. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the garden in gold and shadow, they sat together on the stone bench, planning their future in quiet voices full of anticipation and joy. The following months brought changes both to the land and to Winnie herself. As summer heat descended on the valley, her body softened and rounded, the new life within her making its presence increasingly known. Quinn watched these changes with a mixture of awe and protective concern, often pausing in his work to ensure she wasn't overexerting herself. True to his word, he began construction on the house expansion as soon as the spring planting was complete. With Porter's sons helping in exchange for Quinn's assistance with their irrigation system, the work progressed steadily through the summer months. By August, the Armstrong homestead bore little resemblance to the barren plot Winnie had found upon her arrival nearly 2 years before. The expanded cabin now boasted a proper kitchen with a pump that brought water directly from the well, eliminating the need to carry heavy buckets. A second bedroom stood ready for the baby, its walls freshly whitewashed, a small window positioned to catch the morning light. Most impressive was the land itself. What had once been unyielding dust was now productive soil, nurtured by the water Quinn had found and the care they both had invested. The garden flourished, providing not only for their needs but enough surplus to trade in town. The fruit trees, though still young, promised future harvests that would only improve with time. As autumn approached, bringing relief from the summer heat, Winnie's time grew near. Quinn grew increasingly anxious, insisting that she move into town to be closer to the doctor, but Winnie refused. "This child will be born on Armstrong land," she declared firmly. "Besides, Mrs. Porter has delivered half the babies in the county. She's already agreed to attend me." Quinn knew better than to argue with his wife when her mind was set. Instead, he arranged for Martha Porter to stay with them in the weeks surrounding Winnie's due date, and ensured that a horse was always saddled and ready in case the doctor was needed urgently. The baby chose a clear October night to make its arrival, almost exactly a year after Quinn and Winnie had exchanged their vows. Quinn paced the porch as Martha Porter attended Winnie inside, the hours stretching interminably as his wife's labor progressed. "Women's work," Porter had said gruffly when he'd brought his wife over, clapping Quinn on the shoulder in rough sympathy. Nothing for a man to do but wait and pray. Quinn had never felt so helpless. Each cry from within the cabin cut him to the quick, knowing Winnie was in pain and he could do nothing to ease it. He alternated between pacing and sitting with his head in his hands, the silver pocket watch ticking relentlessly in his vest pocket, marking the passage of time with maddening precision. Finally, as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, a different cry split the air, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Quinn froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. Martha Porter appeared at the door a few minutes later, her lined face tired but smiling. "You can come in now, Mr. Armstrong. There's someone who wants to meet you." On unsteady legs, Quinn entered the cabin. In the bedroom, Winnie lay propped against pillows, her face exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as Quinn approached, tears of joy shimmering in her eyes. "Quinn," she said softly, "come meet your son." A son. The word reverberated through Quinn's chest as he sat carefully on the edge of the bed. Winnie shifted the bundle, revealing a tiny face with Quinn's nose and a shock of dark hair. "Would you like to hold him?" she asked. Terrified and exhilarated, Quinn nodded, accepting the precious weight of his son in arms that suddenly seemed too large, too rough for such delicate cargo. The baby squirmed, his eyes dark blue like all newborns, briefly opening before closing again. "He's perfect," Quinn whispered, afraid to speak louder lest he disturb this miracle. "You're both perfect," Winnie smiled, reaching out to touch his cheek. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names, of course, but had reached no firm decision, agreeing to wait until they met the child who would carry the name through life. Quinn studied his son's face, thinking of the journey that had brought him to this moment. "What about Samuel?" he suggested. "After your father." Samuel Evans Armstrong. Tears spilled from Winnie's eyes at the mention of her father. "He would have liked that," she said, "and he would have been proud to see what we've made of his land." "What you've made of it," Quinn corrected gently. "You were the one with the courage to come here, to start digging when most would have given up. And you were the one who found the water that changed everything," Winnie countered, her hand covering his where it cradled their son. "We did it together, Quinn, just as we'll raise Samuel together." Outside, the sun crested the mountains, sending shafts of golden light through the bedroom window. The new day illuminated the three Armstrongs, Quinn, Winnie, and little Samuel, as they began their life together in the home they had built from barren earth and determined hope. In the years that followed, the Armstrong homestead continued to flourish. Samuel grew from an infant to a sturdy toddler, his curious nature and ready laugh bringing constant joy to his parents. At 3, he was already Quinn's shadow, trailing after his father as he tended the expanding gardens and orchards, learning the signs of water beneath the earth that Quinn could sense with almost mystical precision. Winnie resumed teaching in a limited capacity, holding classes 3 days a week for neighboring children in a small schoolhouse Quinn built adjacent to their home. Her reputation as an excellent educator spread through the county, bringing students from as far as 20 miles away for instruction. Quinn's skills as a dowser remained in high demand, but he no longer traveled far from home to practice his craft. Instead, ranchers and homesteaders came to him, seeking his expertise for their own lands. Many paid in trade rather than cash livestock, lumber, labor gradually increasing the Armstrongs' prosperity and standing in the community. When Samuel was 4, Winnie gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Quinn's mother. With her arrival, the family felt complete, their home filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the everyday miracles of growth and discovery. On a warm spring evening, as their 10th anniversary approached, Quinn and Winnie sat on the porch of their home, watching Samuel and 7-year-old Elizabeth play in the yard. The homestead had grown beyond recognition, fruit trees laden with blossoms, fields prepared for planting, a small herd of cattle grazing in the distance. "Do you ever think about it?" Winnie asked, her head resting against Quinn's shoulder. How different our lives might have been if you hadn't ridden by that day. Quinn's arm tightened around her, his gaze taking in the prosperous land that had once been nothing but dust and struggle. Every day, he admitted, I was following the water like always. Never expected it would lead me to you. Winnie smiled, remembering the suspicious, desperate woman she had been and the wandering dowser who had seen possibility where she had seen only failure. I was so determined to do it all myself, she mused, too proud to accept help, too afraid to trust. And I was too restless to believe I could belong anywhere, Quinn replied, too haunted by the past to imagine a future. He kissed the top of her head, inhaling the lavender scent of her hair. We saved each other, Winnie. In the yard, Samuel let out a whoop of triumph as he successfully lassoed the fence post he'd been practicing on for days. Elizabeth applauded her brother's achievement, her dark braids bouncing as she jumped up and down. He has your touch with animals, Winnie observed. And Elizabeth has your gift for finding water. Did you see her yesterday with that willow branch? It dipped for her just like your divining rod. Pride swelled in Quinn's chest. His children would grow up knowing the land, reading its secrets, appreciating its gifts in ways he had learned only through years of wandering. They would never know the rootless uncertainty that had marked his early life, nor the desperate struggle that had characterized Winnie's first months in New Mexico. We've given them a good foundation, he said. Better than either of us had. Winnie nodded, her thoughts following a similar path. Water and time, she murmured. The gifts we exchanged on our wedding day, they've served us well. As twilight deepened around them, Quinn drew Winnie closer, overwhelmed as always by the miracle of their shared life. From the most unlikely beginnings, a desperate woman digging a dry well, a drifter with an uncanny gift, they had built something lasting and true. I love you, Winifred Armstrong, he whispered against her hair. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. Winnie turned her face to his, the years of partnership visible in the understanding that passed between them. And I love you, Quinn Armstrong, now and always. In the gathering darkness, their lips met in a kiss that held the sweetness of shared history and the promise of days yet to come. Around them, the land they had nurtured together lay peaceful in the desert twilight, water flowing beneath the surface, sustaining the life they had created from dust and hope, and the unexpected blessing of love found in the most barren of places.